The studio lights burned bright, casting a warm glow over the set of the Kelly Clarkson Show. The audience buzzed with anticipation, their chatter a low hum as they waited for the next segment. Kelly Clarkson, all smiles and Texas charm, stood center stage, her laughter cutting through the noise as she bantered with her band. The cameras rolled, capturing every moment of her effortless warmth. Today's guest was Kevin Bacon, Hollywood royalty, known for his roles in Footloose, Apollo 13, and a string of other hits that spanned decades. His name alone drew applause, the kind that rippled through the crowd like a wave. But beneath the surface, something was brewing, something no one in that studio could have predicted. Kevin strode onto the set, his trademark grin in place, but there was a sharpness in his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that didn't quite match the laid-back vibe he was known for. He wore a tailored blazer, dark jeans, and boots that clicked softly against the polished floor. Kelly greeted him with her usual enthusiasm, arms wide for a hug, her voice booming through the mic. Kevin Bacon, everybody. The man, the myth, the legend. The audience roared, but Kevin's smile flickered, just for a second, like a light bulb about to burn out. He took his seat, leaning back, one leg crossed over the other, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. The interview started smoothly. Enough. Kelly, ever the pro, lobbed soft questions about his latest project, a gritty indie film that had critics buzzing. Kevin answered with his usual charisma, tossing in anecdotes about working with first-time directors and the thrill of smaller budgets. The audience ate it up, laughing at his quips, nodding along as he described the creative process. But there was an edge to his voice, a clipped cadence that Kelly seemed to pick up on. She tilted her head, her smile unwavering, and pivoted to a lighter topic. So, Kevin, she said, leaning forward, you've been in this game forever. What's the secret to staying relevant? I mean, you're like the Energizer Bunny of Hollywood. The audience chuckled, but Kevin's laugh was thin, almost forced. Well, Kelly, he said, his tone measured, it's not about chasing trends, it's about doing work that matters, not just whatever gets clicks. The jab landed harder than he might have intended, and a murmur rippled through the crowd. Kelly's smile tightened, but she pressed on, steering the conversation toward his music career with his band, the Bacon Brothers. You and your brother, Michael, you guys have been making music for years. What's it like balancing that with acting? Kevin shifted in his seat, his fingers still tapping that restless rhythm. Music's honest, he said, his voice low. It's not like acting, where you're playing a part, pretending to be something you're not. Music doesn't let you hide. The words hung in the air, sharp and pointed. Kelly blinked, her brow furrowing slightly, but she kept her composure. Well, I love that, she said, her voice bright but strained. Honesty's what makes art real, right? She glanced at the audience, seeking their support, and they clapped on cue. But Kevin wasn't done. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. Exactly, honesty. That's why I get tired of these talk shows sometimes. You know, all this fluff, all this fake cheer. People deserve more than that. The audience went quiet, the air in the studio growing thick. Kelly's smile faltered, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. She opened her mouth to respond, but Kevin kept going, his voice rising. I mean, come on, Kelly, you're talented, but this whole setup, it's just a machine, isn't it? Churning out sound bites for the internet. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath. Kelly's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, her laugh sharp and brittle. Whoa, Kevin, tell us how you really feel, she said, trying to lighten the mood. But the tension was palpable now, a live wire sparking between them. The producers off stage exchanged nervous glances. The director's voice crackled through their headsets, urging them to cut to commercial. But Kevin wasn't backing down, and Kelly wasn't about to let him steamroll her show. She leaned in, her voice steady but firm. You know, Kevin, this machine is about connecting with people. Maybe you're just not used to that anymore. The words hit like a slap, and Kevin's jaw tightened. The audience held its breath, waiting for his response, as the studio lights seemed to burn, hotter than ever. The studio was a pressure cooker, the silence after Kelly's retort so thick it seemed to choke the air. Kevin's eyes narrowed, his fingers no longer tapping but curled tightly around the armrest. He leaned back, a slow, deliberate move, like a predator sizing up its opponent. The audience, still reeling from the exchange, shifted uncomfortably, their earlier excitement replaced by a nervous energy. Kelly, though, held her ground, her gaze steady, her smile gone but her composure intact. She wasn't just the sunny host anymore. She was a professional, and this was her stage. Connecting with people, Kevin said, his voice low but cutting, each word deliberate. That's what you call this. Reading cue cards, hitting your marks, feeding the audience what they're supposed to feel. He gestured toward the crowd, who bristled at being called out. A few murmured, unsure whether to clap or boo. Kevin didn't wait for their reaction. I've been in this business long enough to know when something's real and when it's just a performance. This, right here. It's a performance. Kelly's jaw clenched, but she didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her voice calm but laced with steel. You're right, Kevin, it's a show. My show, and people tune in because they want to feel something real, not to hear someone tear it down. The audience erupted in applause, a wave of support that seemed to catch Kevin off guard. His eyes flickered to the crowd, then back to Kelly, as if recalculating his approach. For a moment, it looked like he might back off, might soften his tone and let the tension dissipate. But Kevin Bacon wasn't known for backing down. You think they're here for you, he said, his voice rising, a bitter edge creeping in. They're here for the spectacle. Kelly, they're here for the drama, the clips that'll go viral by tonight. You're not connecting with them, you're selling them. The words were a gut punch, and the audience gasped again, some shaking their heads, others leaning forward, hooked on the chaos. Kelly's face flushed, but she kept her eyes locked on his, refusing to let him see her rattled. Offstage, the producers were in a frenzy, gesturing wildly, their voices a low hum of panic through the crew's headsets. The director hissed, "Get ready to cut, now." Kelly didn't wait for the commercial break. She stood up, her movement sharp, her hands planted on her hips. You know what, Kevin? If you think this is all fake, maybe you're the one who's lost touch. This show is about joy, about lifting people up, not dragging them down with your cynicism. The audience cheered, louder this time, a few even standing, their claps echoing through the studio. Kevin's expression darkened, his lips pressing into a thin line. He stood too, matching her stance, the two of them now face to face, the space between them crackling with unspoken challenges. You want joy? Kevin shot back, his voice booming now, no longer restrained. Then why don't you talk about something real, like how this industry chews people up, spits them out, and calls it entertainment? You think you're above that, Kelly? You're part of it. He pointed at her, then at the cameras, his gesture sweeping across the set. All of this, it's a game, and you're playing it just like the rest of us. The audience was on edge, some shouting support for Kelly, others murmuring in shock at Kevin's audacity. A woman in the front row covered her mouth, her eyes wide, as if watching a car crash in slow motion. Kelly took a step closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. If you hate the game so much, Kevin, why are you here? Why sit on my couch, in my studio, if it's all such a sham? Her words were a challenge, a dare, and the crowd held its breath, waiting for his answer. Kevin opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a producer rushed onto the set, a clipboard clutched to her chest. We're going to commercial, she said, her voice shaking, trying to diffuse the situation. The director's voice crackled through, louder now, cut, cut, cut. The red lights on the cameras blinked off, and the studio lights dimmed, but the tension didn't break. Kevin and Kelly stood there, locked in a silent standoff, as the audience buzzed with whispers and the crew scrambled to regain control. The studio lights flickered back on as the commercial break ended, but the air remained heavy, charged with the unresolved clash between Kelly and Kevin. The audience, still buzzing from the confrontation, sat on edge, their whispers a low hum. As the cameras rolled again, Kelly stood at the center of the set, her posture rigid but composed, her eyes scanning the crowd for a moment before settling back on Kevin. He hadn't moved. Still standing, his arms crossed, his face a mask of defiance. The producer who'd rushed the stage lingered at the edge, her clipboard a flimsy shield, her eyes darting between the two stars. The director's voice, now a faint murmur in the crew's headsets, urged caution, but the show had to go on. Kelly took a deep breath, her voice steady as she addressed the audience. All right, folks, we're back, and I think we've got some real talk happening here. Her tone was light, but her eyes never left Kevin, a silent challenge still burning. In them, the crowd clapped, a mix of support and uncertainty, unsure where this was headed. She gestured toward Kevin, her hand steady. You've got something to say, Kevin, so, let's hear it. Why are you here, if you think this is all just a game? Kevin uncrossed his arms, his posture loosening, but his expression stayed hard. He stepped forward, closing the gap between them, his voice quieter now but no less intense. I'm here because I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd be different. I've seen your interviews, Kelly, you've got heart, I'll give you that. But this, he waved a hand at the set, the cameras, the cheering crowd. This isn't you. It's a script. You're playing a role, just like I've done my whole career, and I'm sick of it. The audience murmured, some nodding, others shaking their heads. Kelly's eyes softened for a split second, as if his words had hit a nerve, but she quickly regained her edge. You're wrong, Kevin. This show, this stage, it's me. It's where I get to be real with these people. She turned to the audience, her arms open, her voice rising with conviction. They're not here for a script. They're here because we share something, because we laugh and cry and sing together. You can't fake that. The crowd erupted, their cheers louder than before, a wave of loyalty washing over the set. Kevin's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to the audience, then back to Kelly. You really believe that, don't you? He said, his voice almost a whisper, but the mic caught every word. You think this is real connection? Then why don't we talk about something that actually matters? Like how this industry buries anyone who doesn't play by its rules. Like how it's chewed up people like me, like you, and called it success. Kelly's face hardened, but her voice stayed calm, cutting through his words like a blade. You want to talk about the industry? Fine, but don't come on my show and act like you're the only one who's fought to survive it. I've been through the ringer, Kevin, I've clawed my way here, same as you. The difference is, I don't walk around blaming everyone else for it. The audience gasped, then cheered, a few shouting her name. Kelly didn't acknowledge them. Her focus locked on Kevin, who looked like he'd been slapped. He took a step closer, his voice rising again, sharp and raw. You think I'm blaming? I'm just telling the truth. This industry doesn't care about you, or me, or them. He pointed at the audience, his hand shaking slightly. It's about money, clicks, headlines. You're kidding yourself if you think this show is any different. The crowd booed, a low rumble of disapproval. But Kevin didn't flinch. He was in too deep now, his words pouring out like a flood. I came here to promote a film I poured my heart into, but all anyone cares about is the next viral moment. And you're feeding right into it. Kelly's eyes blazed, but she kept her voice steady, her words measured. If you think I'm just chasing headlines, then you don't know me at all. This show is about people, not clicks, and if you can't see that, maybe you don't belong here. The words hung in the air, a line drawn in the sand. The audience went silent, the weight of her statement sinking in. Kevin stared at her, his expression unreadable, his breath heavy. The producer stepped forward again, her voice urgent. Kelly, we need to, but Kelly held up a hand, cutting her off, her eyes still on Kevin. No, let him answer. You've got one more chance, Kevin. Say what you need to say, or we're done here. The studio was a powder keg, and everyone knew the next words would light the fuse. The studio felt like it was holding its breath, the silence so heavy it pressed against the walls. Kelly stood firm, her hand still raised, her eyes boring into Kevin's with an intensity that dared him to cross her. The audience leaned forward, caught in the gravity of the moment, their earlier cheers replaced by a tense anticipation. Kevin's face was a storm of emotions, his jaw tight, his eyes flickering with something between anger and exhaustion. The producer hovered at the edge of the set, her clipboard forgotten, her gaze darting nervously between the two. The director's voice crackled faintly in the crew's headsets, a desperate plea to keep the cameras rolling but be ready to cut at any second. Kevin took a slow step back, his hands dropping to his sides, but his voice didn't soften. One more chance, he said, his tone sharp, almost mocking. That's generous, Kelly, but you don't get it, do you? This isn't about me proving myself to you or your audience. It's about calling out the lie we're all living. You think you're above it, but you're not. You're just better at pretending. His words were like knives, each one aimed to cut deeper. And the audience reacted with a low murmur, a mix of shock and unease. A few clapped, but it was scattered, uncertain. Kelly's eyes narrowed, but she didn't flinch. She stepped closer, closing the gap he'd created, her voice low and deliberate. You want to talk about lies, Kevin? Then let's talk about you. You walk in here, acting like you're some rebel, exposing the truth, but you're sitting on my couch, taking the paycheck, playing the game just like the rest of us. So what's your truth? You hate this industry, but you're still here. Why? Her question hung in the air, sharp and unyielding, and the crowd erupted in applause. Their loyalty to her reignited. Kevin's face twitched, a flash of something raw crossing his features, like her words had hit a nerve he didn't expect. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his hands clenching into fists. You want to know why I'm here? He said finally, his voice quieter now, but heavy with conviction. Because I still believe in the work, the stories, the art, the stuff that matters. But this, he gestured at the set, the cameras, the glowing applause sign. This isn't art, it's a circus, and I'm done being one of the clowns. The audience gasped, a collective jolt, and Kelly's expression hardened. She crossed her arms, her voice steady but cold. If you think this is a circus, Kevin, then maybe you should leave. Nobody's forcing you to stay. The words were a gauntlet thrown down, and the crowd roared, some shouting her name, others yelling at Kevin to sit down. The producer took a hesitant step forward, her voice trembling. Kelly, maybe we should know. Kelly snapped, her eyes still locked on Kevin. He wants to call this a circus. Let him walk out, right now. The audience cheered louder, their energy a tidal wave. But Kevin didn't move. His eyes searched hers, as if looking for a crack in her resolve, a hint that she might back down. But Kelly stood her ground, unyielding, her silence louder than any words. Then Kevin laughed, a short, bitter sound that cut through the noise. You know what, Kelly? You're good. You're really good. You've got them eating out of your hand. He nodded toward the audience, his smile tight and humorless. But you're not fooling me. You're part of the machine, same as everyone else. And deep down, you know it. He turned, as if to walk off, but stopped, spinning back to face her. You want me to leave? Fine, but don't act like this is my loss. You're the one stuck here. playing the same role day after day. The crowd booed, their voices rising in a chaotic swell, but Kelly raised a hand, silencing them. "You're wrong, Kevin," she said, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "I'm here because I choose to be, because I love this. If you can't handle that, then go. The door's right there." She pointed off stage, her gesture final, unapologetic. The audience exploded, their cheers shaking the studio, but Kevin just stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like he might say something else, might try to salvage the moment. But then he turned, his boots clicking against the floor, and started walking toward the wings. The producer scrambled after him, whispering urgently, but Kevin didn't stop. The cameras followed, catching every step, as the audience's cheers turned to a mix of boos and stunned murmurs. Kelly stood alone on the set, her chest rising and falling, her face a mask of resolve as the chaos unfolded around her. The studio was a whirlwind of noise as Kevin's boots echoed off the polished floor, each step a deliberate punctuation to the chaos he'd unleashed. The audience's boos mingled with scattered cheers, a cacophony of divided loyalties that filled the air like static. Kelly stood alone in the spotlight, her posture unwavering, her eyes following Kevin as he disappeared into the wings. The cameras lingered on her, capturing the slight tremor in her hands, the only sign of the storm raging beneath her composed exterior. The producer, now trailing Kevin off stage, threw a frantic glance back at Kelly, but the host didn't acknowledge her. The director's voice hissed through the crew's headsets, a sharp command to keep rolling, to milk every second of this drama for the broadcast. Kelly turned to the audience, her face softening just enough to reconnect with them. "Well, folks," she said, her voice steady but tinged with a raw edge, "that was something." The crowd laughed, a nervous release, and she flashed a small smile, reclaiming the space. "But you know what? This show's about real moments, even the messy ones. So let's keep it moving." She walked back to her chair, sitting with a grace that belied the tension still crackling around her. The audience clapped, their support a lifeline, pulling the energy back to her side. Offstage, the chaos continued. Kevin stood in the dimly lit corridor, his hands on his hips, his breath heavy as the producer tried to calm him. "You can't just walk off like that," she said, her voice low but urgent. "We need you back out there. Kevin, let's smooth this over." He shook his head, his eyes hard. "I'm done," he said, his voice flat. "I said what I needed to say. She wants me gone? I'm gone." The producer's face paled, her clipboard trembling in her hands. "You don't understand. This is live TV. We can't just then figure it out," Kevin snapped, turning away. He pushed past a startled stagehand, heading for the exit, his silhouette sharp against the fluorescent lights. The producer hesitated, then rushed back toward the set, whispering into her headset, her words a jumble of panic. The crew scrambled, adjusting cameras, redirecting focus to Kelly, who was now steering the show back on track with a story about her latest tour. Her voice was bright, but her eyes flicked toward the wings, as if bracing for another surprise. Back on the set, Kelly leaned forward, engaging the audience with a warmth that felt like a reset. "You know, sometimes things get heated, but that's what makes this real," she said, her tone confessional. "I love this job because I get to sit here with you all, sharing stories, laughing, crying. That's what matters." The audience cheered, their energy surging back to her, but a few still glanced toward the wings, wondering if Kevin would reappear. The applause sign flashed, but it wasn't needed. The crowd was hers again. Meanwhile, in the control room, the director was barking orders, his face red with stress. "Stay on, Kelly, tight shot, keep it on her," he said, his hands waving at the monitors. "We'll edit the rerun later, but for now, we ride this out." The producers huddled around him, their voices overlapping as they debated whether to send someone after Kevin or let the moment stand. One suggested cutting to a pre-recorded segment, but the director shook his head. "No way, this is gold. People are going to talk about this for weeks." Back on the set, Kelly transitioned to a lighter topic, introducing a musical performance, scheduled for later in the show. Her laugh was genuine, but her eyes carried a weight, a flicker of the confrontation still lingering. The audience, sensing her effort, leaned into her energy, clapping along as she bantered with her band. But the atmosphere was different now, charged with the aftershocks of Kevin's exit. A few audience members whispered to each other, their phones already out, no doubt tweeting about the clash. The video clips already spreading like wildfire offstage. The producer caught up with Kevin near the studio's back exit, her voice pleading, "Kevin, please, just come back for the last segment. We can spin this, make it a moment of reconciliation." He stopped, his hand on the door, his eyes cold. "Reconciliation," he said, his voice low. "There's no spinning this. I meant every word." He pushed the door open, the sunlight outside harsh against his face, and stepped out, leaving the producer staring after him as the door slammed shut. Kelly, unaware of the backstage drama, wrapped up her segment, her smile bright but her heart racing. The show was far from over, and she knew the real fallout was just beginning. The studio lights burned steady as Kelly pushed through the final segment, her voice carrying a warmth that masked the turmoil still simmering beneath the surface. The audience, now fully in her corner, laughed and clapped as she introduced the musical guest, a rising pop star whose upbeat performance was meant to close the show on a high note. Kelly swayed to the music, her smile wide, but her eyes occasionally darted to the side, as if half expecting Kevin to storm back onto the set. The camera stayed tight on her, the director's orders clear. Keep the focus on Kelly. Let her shine. Let the audience forget the chaos that had unfolded. But the energy in the room was different, electric with the memory of the clash, and no amount of music could erase it completely. Backstage, the producer stood frozen, staring at the closed exit door where Kevin had disappeared. Her headset buzzed, with the director's voice, demanding an update, but she had nothing to offer. Kevin was gone, his parting words echoing in her mind. I meant every word. She turned back toward the set, her face pale, knowing the fallout would be a nightmare. The show was live, the moment already rippling across social media, with clips of the confrontation racking up views by the second. She hurried to the control room where the producers were in a frenzy, their phones lighting up with messages from the network demanding explanations, damage control, anything to spin this into something salvageable. The musical performance ended, and the audience roared, their applause a release of pent-up energy. Kelly stepped back into the spotlight, her hands clasped, her smile unwavering. Wow, wasn't that incredible? She said, her voice bright but carrying a faint edge of exhaustion. Thank you all for being here, for sharing this with me. This show, it's about all of us, coming together, no matter what. The crowd cheered, some standing, their loyalty to her unshaken. She blew a kiss, waved, and the cameras panned out as the credits rolled, the music swelling to signal the end of the broadcast. But the story didn't end there. As the audience filed out, their whispers turned to full-blown conversations, their phones glowing with posts and comments about the clash. Did you see how Kelly handled him? One woman said, her voice odd, he was out of line. Another muttered, shaking his head. The crew, meanwhile, scrambled to wrap up, their faces a mix of shock and adrenaline. The director leaned back in his chair, staring at the monitors, a grim smile on his face. This is gonna be everywhere, he said, almost to himself. We didn't just make TV today, we made history. Outside, Kevin stood in the parking lot, the sunlight harsh against his face, his hands stuffed in his pockets. A few paparazzi lingered nearby, their cameras clicking, but he ignored them, climbing into his car without a word. As he pulled away, his phone buzzed with notifications, messages from his agent, his publicist, all urging him to make a statement, to get ahead of the story, but Kevin didn't care. He'd said what he needed to say, and the weight of it felt both freeing and heavy. Like a chain he'd finally broken but still carried. Back in the studio, Kelly retreated to her dressing room, closing the door behind her. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling now that the cameras were off. Her assistant hovered nearby, offering water, but Kelly waved her away. I'm fine, she said, her voice quiet but firm. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes tracing the lines of a face that had just weathered a storm. Kevin's words echoed in her mind. His accusations about the industry, the machine, her role in it. She shook her head, pushing them away. But a small part of her wondered if he'd been right, if only a little. The network execs were already calling, their voices a mix of panic and excitement, planning how to handle the aftermath. The clip of the confrontation was trending, hashtags multiplying, opinions splitting. Some called Kevin a truth-teller, others a has-been throwing a tantrum. Kelly's fans rallied around her, praising her strength, her grace under pressure. The story was no longer just about a talk show gone wrong. It was a lightning rod, sparking debates about authenticity, fame, and the cost of staying in the game. Kelly stood, smoothing her dress, her resolve hardening. She'd fought too hard to let this define her. The show would go on, and so would she. But as she left the dressing room, the weight of the day lingered, a reminder that some battles leave scars, even when you win. The studio lights dimmed behind her, the set now empty, but the echoes of the clash would resonate far beyond those walls.